Alright, I'm coming to you live from Casper, Wyoming, and I'm going to be tying a North Platte River style string leech. This fly is a spin-off of the popular hothead leech and the pine squirrel leech around here, and it takes a little bit of a Pacific Northwest style string leech. We've just sized it down, and we've given it a color scheme that makes sense for the North Platte River, Gray Reef, Fremont Canyon, Miracle Mile. Designed to be fished as a swung fly, either on a single-handed rod or two-handed rod under a sink tip. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to break a shank, which I've already done here, and we want to keep the shank very short that we're going to be tying onto. If you want to get a reference, it's about 3/8 of an inch, maybe the length of a fingernail at the very most. Whatever you want to use, just make sure it's a straight eye hook and that it has a fairly decent size eye. The one I like to use are these Gami's SL45s. A little bit pricey, but they break straight and the eye's big enough. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our Dacron backing. This is a 30-pound, I'm sorry, it's not Dacron, it's a gel spun, so that way it's a little bit thinner but strong still. And we're going to feed that through the eye of the hook, just like that. And then we're going to take our bead, which is a tungsten plummeting bead from Hairline. And we don't want a ton of weight on this. This fly isn't designed to jig like a cast and strip fly. It's designed to fish under a tip, and we're using the tip. So really the only thing that this orange bead is doing for me is just giving the fly just enough weight just to sink the rabbit, but I don't want it diving head first. So I want it swimming straight. Alright, so once we have that threaded, as you see here, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the shank around, and I'm going to put the shank right through the bead, just like so. And then I'm going to pull it tight, and then I'm going to put the shank in the vise. And make sure that the hook eye is straight, like that. Alright, so now once we have that attached, straighten that out. I'm going to go ahead and start tying the fly, and that's probably the trickiest part of this entire pattern. So designed really as a guide fly. It's an easy, fast, articulated fly that certainly catches fish. And like it on that short shank, or really no shank, because it just frees up the tail and doesn't bind it down like the hothead leech or pine squirrel leech that's tied on an actual hook. You lose a lot of movement that way. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to secure this down. And pan over here. This is going to be eventually used to tie on our stinger. So it's about right there. Take the thread back to the bend, and I'm using just a standard size brown rabbit strip here. Pine squirrel is just a little too thin on the hide to pierce, and it just breaks. Also doesn't have quite enough body for a swing fly, so prefer to use rabbit on this. And want it to be no more than about an inch or inch and a half long tail. We're trying to size down the proportions here to just make it basically a pine squirrel leech, but articulated with a little bit more movement. That's about right, and we're kind of measuring the skin up to be about the length of our attachment to our stinger hook there. And if you want this all to be just a little bit more secure at this point, you can put down a little layer of Zap-A-Gap there, hold it all together. Alright, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my second piece of rabbit, and this is the part where a lot of people I see get a little too carried away with, is they want to get in all these wraps of this. 1 or 2 wraps tops with your rabbit and should be just fine. So with every stroke, we're just going to take that hair and wet your fingers and just pull it back, just like that. So, like I said, about 2.5 spins of the rabbit at the collar will be just fine, because if we get too much material up here, it just makes the fly a little too buoyant and it holds it up, and we want this fly just to sink and be real streamlined, like a leech is. We don't want a ton of hair up. So I'm going to take root beer colored cactus chenille here in the micro size, very thin, and we're just going to give it a little shine right up here at the collar. Just a couple spins here just to cover all the thread work. Like that. And we'll finish. So let's see why this fly is so effective now. See that whole tail? That's all movement. There's nothing restricting it. It's just basically a piece of rabbit tied onto a hook, which is what we want. The less hook we have, the more movement. Now for attaching the stinger, here is the trick. So I like my stinger hook. As far as the stinger hook you use, octopus hooks, size 6, 8, we don't want it to be too heavy of a wire hook, otherwise it'll make the tail kind of sag down as it's swimming through the water. So fairly light wire stinger hook would be ideal. So I've looped that on now. It's just a loop-to-loop connection on the stinger. And then what I do is I take the stinger right through, and I'll try to get this in the video, right through the very back of the rabbit strip. I pierce it through. And then once it's through, see how it's a loop like that, slide it down, hook's riding up. Stinger hook works. No short strikes, a lot of movement. The whole fly is going to move.